We have a Calgary pastor, so many of you may be familiar with Pastor Derek Reimer, who was arrested over the weekend for protesting these sorts of events that were happening in the public library in Calgary. So that's in Alberta. And so when the protesters came out to kind of show their support for Pastor Reimer, they were essentially cattled by radical LGBTQ plus SL whatever supporters and Antifa. So this is happening over this past weekend in Canada, in Calgary. And we have another clip to share with you of that.
Out there. Where are you? Where are you? Where's the Calgary mayor? Your mayor is corrupt. We're being threatened here, and we're getting in trouble for harassment. I don't think so. Hey. You guys aren't hanging out here, all right? We got cornered. You guys go out the back way, all right? Are you gonna help us? Well, we'll have people watch like we always have, right? You better escort us because these people are now violent. Yeah, and that's why you're in here, and that's why you can go out there. We'll have some members with us. How many? So loving, so tolerant, so full of hate. Violent. Where love is love, right? Equality.
Yeah, and so as soon as you don't agree with them, all of a sudden this idea of love is love is just thrown out the window, and we are going to harass and intimidate you. Mm-hmm. So much for freedom of expression.
It's a sign of the radical left. I mean, we've seen this over and over. If you disagree with Black Lives Matter, if you disagree with even some of the COVID stuff, it often turns to violence instead of just a conversation about what is your opinion, what is my opinion. God forbid, could we find common ground on this issue at all? And that's one of the things I was saying too when I was getting, swarmed by Antifa type at a drag queen story time. It's like, love is love. Like, I thought this was love is love. What is going on here? And they just use those words to excuse the actual hate. But I think one of the common traits of Marxism, or one of the philosophies behind it, is that you just accuse the other people of doing what you're doing. And then that way, no one's looking at you. And that's what's happening here. You say you're acting in love, they're acting in hate. Therefore, you mask the hate that you are doing and the violence. Because let's be honest, these same types of groups like to say the words people opposing drag queen Storytime are saying are violence. And then they're doing actual physical violence instead.
Right. The mental gymnastics needed to try to conform to their ideation that thoughts equal violence somehow. Meanwhile, but unless you're actually on the ground, unless you go there and see it for yourself or report on it, as you have very bravely, thank you, Drea, for your work, because they are very intimidating and very just toxic and aggressive. And so by the mainstream media, only showing one side of what's happening, you would otherwise never know that this sort of thing takes place at these kinds of events, because it's just propped up under this flowery language. And again, the guise of being inclusive and tolerant and loving. So I think that's why it's really important for us also to have independent journalism in Canada, but also to be able to uphold the literal cornerstone of democracy, which is debate. And why can't we have these conversations and this scrutiny and this criticism and debate it like rational, reasonable adults without the violence and the aggression. I mean,
Because
parents who have concerns aren't they're not bigots, they're not far
no.
right transphobes. They have
Right.
valid, legitimate concerns, and we should have a discussion about that.
Well, and that's why the discussion isn't happening, because the concerns are valid, they're logical, and they're not rooted in hate. And thus for just shut it all down so that the political agenda survives, right? And there's money, as you know, there's money thrown into these events as well. You know, these drag queens wouldn't be showing up in almost all cases if they weren't getting paid by taxpayer dollars to be there. So
Well, that's the really creepy part too, is when this
yeah,
happens at taxpayer-funded institutions and is at the taxpayer's expense, then we all have a right to bring our voices to
exactly.
the table and have them heard. But regardless, I think at this same event here is where the counter signal also caught footage of an old white guy, their words, not mine,
Yeah.
spitting on a visible minority for having the opposite view.
Mhm.
Hey, shut the fuck up. I'm talking about to be transformed. No fucking language. No fucking Calgary's about to be transformed. You just came up to me. You came up to me. You were back there. You were back there, and then you just walked here. And then you just walked here. What you want a man? Is a dog walking in your girl's bathroom? You point my finger at me. Fuck up now. You have no argument. Fuck up, you have no argument. No education, you're shaking? Hey! This guy just spat on me! This guy just fucking spat on me!
There's a smirking.
This guy spat on me, guys! Come on! No, it's not! You didn't!
It's so classless.
It is. And that's a hot drink too. I'm assuming it's a coffee.
Well, yeah,
That's
then he throws it at
assault.
him.
That's assault. And this is because they know they can get away with this stuff, because they've been at some of these rallies. They see that the police are in their favor. The news is in their favor. And look at the unlawfulness that's happening from physical assaults in different ways. Like, oh, it's so gross. And that's what I was talking about with the smirking. If I don't know if we can play it back because it's really fast there, but if you look, the officers are smirking after that happens. They think it's hilarious.
Oh, I missed that part.
Yeah, it's really bad. Let's see if we can see it here. Look at it. Look,
Oh, yeah.
they're laughing about it. And he's like, hey, I just have been assaulted. This is the police in Canada. Calgary, right? Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, Calgary police. I mean, some might not be surprised.
Well, the mayor there is working on trying to make it, a hate crime just to protest these horrific events.
Which is part of the reason why Pastor Derek Reimer in Calgary is being held. He's being held in jail. He is currently detained for protesting a library-held drag queen story hour where he was actually assaulted. He was the one being assaulted. He didn't do any sort of physical violence toward anybody, but simply the act of being there in opposition is enough to have him. Here he is being assaulted by the attendees. Look, like he smashes his head on the ground there. And now he is the one being detained, if you can believe it. That's the state of affairs in Canada now. If you denounce this radical sexualized ideology for infiltrating your public institutions at your own taxpayer dollar expense. And I think we have a quick update also because he was in court this morning. Drea, I think you shared something there.
Right. So Sheila Gunn-Reid is in court and she gave us a breaking update. So she says Pastor Derek Reimer will remain in jail until at least March 14th. That will be his next bail review. That will be a whole 13 days in custody by then for peacefully protesting an all ages drag event. 14 days. I mean, this is the COVID pastors in Alberta all over again, if you ask me, is the next thing, right? It's not just Christians, obviously, who take issues with this, people who are not religious as well. But I know that there's a lot of people in the Muslim community very concerned about what's happening here. I'm getting those emails and messages as well. And then in the US, you see some of them are actually leading protests against these events as well.
Right. This is no longer teetering on being a political prisoner. You're now a religious prisoner. And if you uphold your religious doctrine and view this as being inherently wrong and are concerned about it, then we're going to jail and detain you, even though you were the one being assaulted for your mere presence, questioning the appropriateness of this sort of event for children. Like, it is one thing to be a consensual adult and have a bunch of adults in the room and whatever, do what you're going to do on your own time. Said that over and over again. If you're a consensual adult, you want to engage in some provocative entertainment, whatever. These are children, and this is a pastor. That is literally his service to God that he is upholding. And then he was assaulted and jailed. I mean, the whole thing again is just madness.
That's a clip from something we call Rebel News Daily. It's our daily live stream hosted by my friend David Menzies, but the show also includes a rotating cast of hosts and special guests, including me. It's a great way for us to talk about the news of the day as the news is happening in an unscripted fashion, and it's an awesome way for you to interact with us as well. We stream every weekday, 1 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Mountain, wherever you find Rebel News. See you there.